You ever have one of those moments where the air just shifts like you're standing still, but the world suddenly tilts, and you realize everything's about to change? That happened to me about 6 months ago in Terminal B of Lincoln International, somewhere between Gate 34 and a strong urge to cancel my entire business trip. Now, I've been flying for over 20 years, first for work, then as a CEO. I've racked up more miles than I can count, flown first class more times than I care to admit, and never once made a scene. But on that particular Tuesday morning, dressed in a navy blue suit I had tailored 2 weeks prior, I apparently still didn't look like I belonged in seat 1A. My name's Cameron Ellis, and I run a logistics company that partners with a few major airlines. You know, the kind that keeps fleets running on time, makes sure cargo doesn't go missing, and handles the kind of back-end stuff most passengers never think about. I don't flash it around, I don't need to. I let my work speak louder than any title. So there I was, boarding pass in hand, laptop bag slung over my shoulder, waiting patiently in the first-class boarding line when I heard Itha's sharp voice behind the counter. "Sir, economy boards after Zone 1. And I remember blinking, confused at first, thinking maybe she was talking to someone else. But when I looked up, the woman was staring right at me. Blonde, maybe mid-40s, with a polished airline uniform and a name tag that read Tracy. She had that tight smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, the kind that says, "I've already made a judgment, and you're not changing it." I smiled politely and said, "I'm in seat 1A, handing her my phone with the digital boarding pass. She didn't even scan it. Just looked me up and down like I'd stolen someone else's ticket. "I think you're confused," she said, her voice dropping an octave like I was 5 years old. "This line is for first class." I said nothing at first. Not because I didn't have something to say, believe me. I did, but because I was stunned. I've dealt with subtle racism before. The kind where someone double-checks your credit card when you buy an expensive watch. The kind where hotel staff assume you're a bellhop even though you're in a suit. But this was bold, public, and completely unprovoked. I held my tone, stayed calm. "Yes, ma'am. That's my seat." She still didn't scan the ticket, just tilted her head and said, "Please step aside while we finish boarding our priority guests." Now here's where it gets interesting. See, Tracy wasn't just being rude, she was being performative. Loud enough for the couple behind me to hear, and just soft enough to pretend it was protocol. I stepped aside, but not because I was embarrassed. I stepped aside because I was watching. I watched as she smiled warmly at the man in khakis behind me, didn't check his ID, didn't question his seat, just waved him through. That was when I felt that familiar burn behind my chest. Not anger exactly, just that tired kind of disappointment. The kind that makes you sigh instead of shout. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I stepped to the side, pulled out my phone, and made a call. Now, I'm not the type to throw my weight around. Never have been. But this was different. This wasn't just about Metis, was about the dozens of folks who've had to grin and bear that same treatment and walk on like nothing happened. So I called Angela, my operations lead over at Apex Aerologics company I built from scratch. She picked up in 2 rings. "Hey boss," she said. "Hey, can you patch me through to Darian at Global Air Ops? Gate 34, Flight 9812 to Charlotte. We got a situation." She didn't even ask. Just said, "Got it." By the time they finished boarding, I was still standing there. Tracy shot me a smug look, probably thinking she'd won whatever twisted power game she was playing. A few passengers glanced at me, some curious, some indifferent. Nobody said a word. And then a man in a tailored gray blazer walked briskly toward the gate. I recognized him, Darian Winters, VP of Flight Operations for Global Air. He nodded at me, then walked straight past Tracy. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. She blinked, a little thrown off. "No, sir. Just handling the boarding process." Darian raised a brow. "Because Mr. Ellis should have been in his seat 10 minutes ago." She stammered something about verifying credentials, but Darian wasn't having it. "Let's go," he said, gesturing toward the jet bridge. We walked on, past rows of already settled passengers. I saw heads turn, whispers ripple. When we reached the front, the lead flight attendant looked confused until Darian leaned in and said something quietly in her ear. Her eyes widened. Then came the captain. "Captain Holloway," Darian said flatly. "We need to speak outside." Now, the entire cabin was silent. The captain hesitated, confused, maybe annoyed, but he complied. They both stepped off the plane. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. When the captain returned, he looked pale. He didn't say a word, just walked back into the cockpit. But it wasn't to fly. It was to grab his bag. They pulled the pilot from the flight. And I was escorted to seat 1A by the same attendant who wouldn't meet my eyes. I sat down, buckled up, and stared straight ahead. No smugness. No gloating. Just silence. The flight took off with a backup pilot. I watched the clouds out the window, trying to make sense of the whole thing. And I remember feeling sad, not for me, but for how many others get dismissed without a second glance. About halfway through the flight, a man across the aisle, white guy, mid-30s, looked like a consultant, leaned over and said, "Hey, sorry about what happened back there. I should have said something." I looked at him, nodded, and said, "Appreciate it." But I wasn't waiting on anyone to speak for me. We didn't talk the rest of the flight. A few days later, I got a letter from the airline, a formal apology, the kind drafted by lawyers and signed by some VP I'd never met. Tracy was reassigned, whatever that means. Captain Holloway was placed on review. But that wasn't the point. The point is this: people make assumptions every day, based on skin, clothes, posture, accent. And most of the time, those assumptions go unchecked. But every once in a while, the person they underestimate turns out to have a little more authority than expected. So tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have called it out or let it slide? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because I think it's time we talk about what belonging really looks like and who gets to decide.